Please be advised that the views and opinions of the host and guests do not reflect those of the station, the management, and its network.
Okay, dito sa Pilipinas, tayong mga Pilipino, naniniwala tayo that we're very independent and we're free, we're sovereign. But the truth is, all nations in the world are affected by the international situation. Kumbaga sa itlog, hindi yan mag-hatch kung walang external effort to hatch it. And so yan ang katotohanan. May powerful countries and regions and merong mga dehadong mga regions. Ang Asia, tulad ng Pilipinas, dehado for the past 100, 200 years. Na-colonize tayo. Pero ngayon, we're emerging as stronger nations now. But doon sa kanluran, nararamdaman naman nila na humihina sila. And recently, nagpulong na naman under the baton of the United States of America, ang G7, Group of Seven, na Western countries and their allies. In the past, they dominated the world in the past 100 years, and lalo na in the colonial period. But even if before, America dominated the world economy up to 40% of its global GDP, and Europe another 30%. Today, nabaliktad na. Ang Asia, ang China, at ang RCEP, ang ASEAN, and Japan, South Korea, and so on, dominate up to 40% of the global economy with 30% of the population of the world. Kaya nararamdaman ng kanluran, and lalo-lalo na ng Estados Unidos na humihina sila. But before we go on, let's talk about two major developments which also shows how Asia rising. Number one, China has launched actually the Zhenzhou 12-man spaceship last June 17. Just yesterday, 9 o'clock in the morning, kahapon, at yung tatlong taikonaut na tawag nila, or astronaut in American terms, ay nandun na sa space station nila. So this is a very big achievement for Asia. The first Asian country. Japan
kasi they did not include China in the space program ng US at saka I think Russia,
Noong 2011, nag-apply ang China na sumali doon sa space station project ng Estados Unidos, NASA, nakasama ang Japan at Russia at iba pa, pero tinanggihan ang China. So gumawa ang China ng sarili niya.
Ngayon successful.
Okay. And the second news item that is, I think, very significant for us here in the Philippines is itong ulat ng China is likely the first country to reach 96% urban home ownership, according to the People's Bank of China. Bakit mahalaga po, at gusto kong iulat ito, 50% of our Metro Manila population, minimum
Are squatters.
Yes. Bakit hindi natin, hindi lang squatters ang problema sa housing. Ang middle class
nagre-rent.
Binabayad nila yung 20 to 30% and maybe more of their income to rental.
Kasi mahal ang rental dito.
And so sana tayo matuto sa China tungkol dito. So let's now go on to the G7, the Group of Seven. And ang reaction po ng China sa Group of Seven, sabi dito ng Teller report, the G7 is not a club hostile to China according to Macron. Kasi yung Estados Unidos gustong isabong ang G7 laban sa China. Pero hindi nagkakasundo din sa G7. Hindi nagkakaisa. Sabi ng Ani, this is a South African. Kumuha ko sa Africa ng balita para neutral. Inulat po rito, G7 leaders expressed differences over dealing with China in a tense session. Napaka-tense po ang debate nila tungkol dyan sa gusto ni Biden. Na kanilang pinatay ang internet, parang walang malik na mga away nila sa loob, debate. So sabi dito, however, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, and leaders from the European Union sought to emphasize areas of cooperation with China. Ang CNN nga ang nag-report nito. And dito sa kaliwa naman, si Macron ng ng Francia, sabi, the G7 is not a club hostile to China. Hindi kaaway ng G7
ang China.
Na gusto naman ni Biden iaway.
Kasi alam niyo po, ang nabasa ko rin, doon sa G7, how many times na, kumbaga, ang pinag-uusapan lang is all about China, and it was actually the US is trying to push and push. And I think Biden wants to create a club against China, which the European leaders is opposing.
They were trying also to build hostility against Russia, no? China and Russia.
Yung dalawa.
So, pero hindi ubra because of yung kasasabi nga lang natin kanina, no? Yung GDP 40% na. Saan sila kukuha ng mga goods nila? Mula doon sa West, sa kanila, mahal din, no? Or they will open up their markets and sources of supply.
And yung G7 mismo, sinong pinakamalaking trading partners ng pinakamalaking bansa doon? China. The US has China as the biggest trading partner. Germany has China as the biggest trading partner. France has China as the biggest trading partner. So
hindi kasi China's there are in top 3 of China's biggest trading partner. First you have the ASEAN, then you have EU, and the third only is US. So if you're an EU leader, how can you possibly agree with the US having a hostile or antagonistic relation with China when your economies are actually dependent upon that big market, no? So hindi talaga, understandable ang stand ng France, Germany, and even Italy. Kasi kahit Germany pa lang, yung mga Volkswagen nila, Mercedes-Benz, ang dami sa ang manufacturing nasa
Si
China,
Kado, laging yan naalala kasi bumisita kami sa China. Ano kwento mo?
Bilang ako ng bilang sa kalye.
Opo.
Every 5th car was a Volkswagen.
Oh, yes.
No? Tapos sabi ko, teka muna, bakit ang daming rito, ang daming Toyota, yung malaking Toyota, yung Land Cruiser, no? Tapos tinitingnan ko kung diesel, hindi gasolina. So it's really an affluent country. And Germany has, for instance, become number 1 again over Toyota of Japan because lumaki ang kanyang Chinese market at saka Russian market. In Russia and in China, as I said, every 5th, binilang ko po yan eh. Pangalawa, may sinasabi because nagkaroon din ng hambingan and some opinion were taken from the African side of the spectrum, no? And a certain public works minister from Liberia, ito si Goody Moore, came up na unless the US specifically, kasi naliligaw din siya sa, nag-a-adjust na kasi ang Europe eh, unless the US re-evaluate, no? Their own interests, no? And that of the West, onto the specific people's or countries' interests that they're dealing with from both growth diagnostics and constraint analysis. Yun daw yung bago ngayon sa Harvard. No? Gamitin yung formula na yun, mamimislead ang US in the next decade.
Hindi kasi mahirap kasi ang ng G7, yung ng positioning ng US sa G7. They were there not necessarily to discuss issue that has something to do with the globe, like for example vaccine. Ang sabi nila 1 billion, pero ang WHO ang sabi we need 16 billion kasi 1 billion pa lang nababakuna. Hindi nila yon na maximize, no? At the same time meron pang ino-offer yung tinatawag nilang build back better world, na parang katulad nung ginagawa ni Biden ngayon sa Amerika na let's have this, it's a $40 trillion daw na funding, pero out of the blue ino-offer niya to counter what you call the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative ng China. Ang tanong doon, saan mo kukunin yung pondo? Na ngayon nga ang US is even having many domestic problem that has something to do with funding as well. No, tapos kalaban pa ni Biden ang mga malaking kumpanya sa US kasi gusto niyang i-tax sila ng malaki. So saan ka kukuha ng pondo? Do you really think that European countries will shell out money for that program?
Well, the European countries are also in the doldrums ang kanilang mga
Isa pa
economy.
yan, oo.
Ang makakabuhay lang po dyan sa pag-asa na yan,
South Korea at Japan.
South Korea and Japan, yan may mga surplus. So,
but do you really think also South Korea and Japan will give out surplus for that?
And South Korea and Japan are also part of the BRI.
Oo.
Community.
At sinali rin sila ni Barack Obama doon sa Trans-Pacific Partnership together with New Zealand, the Marianas and
the Pacific
Australia.
Islands. Australia.
No? Pababang pa ganon. No? hindi rin nagbunga yun.
Hindi rin.
Nawala rin.
Kasi problema nun, that's the pivot to Asia part ng economic daw. Walang pondo. Dito naman sa Indo-Pacific strategy ni Trump, wala ding pondo. Pagdating ngayon kay Biden, he is trying to capitalize on G7. Ang tanong lagi, do you really have the fund? And one more thing, even if they have the funding, how can they possibly rival with China, BRI, when in fact China give this kind of incentive to developing nations without string attached? Ang US, kapag nagbigay yan ng pondo or nagbigay yan ng grant, malagi may string attached yan. You have to do this, you have to do this, you have to be democracy, you have to do that. Ganun, mahirap yun eh. Developing countries will not anymore be, alam mo, magugoyo. Hindi na. Kasi they have China on the other hand.
Sa World Bank at saka ADB, yung mga feasibility study charged to you. Sa China,
Wala,
yung
sa
AIIB niya, sakop ng China.
Oo, yun
Tapos
yun
yung AIIB, yung bank ng ginawa niya, nakatutok doon sa Belt and Road Initiative.
Kasi infrastructure
So
ang focus.
talagang balanse siya. Yung TPP, kaya nag-collapse, at ito rin magko-collapse, saan sila, sabi mo nga, kukuha ng pondo.
Yeah. Well, the other aspect na nami-miss dito sa mga komentaryo dito ay ang China backs up the
Yes.
BRI with their industrial capacity. One of the reasons why China, for its own interest, pushed the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, para yung surplus steel production nila, surplus other production, kasi to build railway ties, locomotive engines, power generation plant. May surplus sila, sobrang malakas ang production nila. Para ito nga ay maibenta doon sa mga projects, so pinapautang nila. And matuwan-tuwa nga, tulad nung kinote mo, si Gude, Moore, tuwan-tuwa ang Africa. Kasi wala silang ibang paraan kundi ganyan para mag-develop. Hindi tulad ng 500 taon na paglalakop ng kanluran sa kanila, walang development. Puro extraction lang.
Isa pag na-research ko, sa Guangdong pala, very friendly sila sa African. Miski na may mga violations sa immigration, okay lang, they're lenient, no? At doon pala nagko-conglomerate yung mga African businessmen.
Yeah.
At nakakakuha sila at naibabalik nila sa Africa. So may backdoor pa bukod doon sa direct BRI. May backdoor pa sa loob ng China that goes back to Africa.
Well, yung nabanggit mo si Gude Moore, dating Public Works Minister ng Liberia, sabi niya, well, doon sa level ng ordinary folks, siguro may mga racism minsan lumilitaw din, but sa official policy ng China, napakaganda daw ang trato sa Africa ng government ng China, so I think we should go by that.
There are a lot of case study actually right now na if you look at certain countries or certain parts of Africa na mataas at very close ang partnership with Asia, with China per se, ang development nandyan. Pag sinabi mong development, andyan yung housing, yung technology. Ang number one dapat na alalahan yung technology. China's technology is very advanced at the moment. Nalampasan na ata nila yung US.
Of course, China, with regards to the G7, sila ay nag-respond with some skepticism and criticism kasi because of Biden's efforts, and so may criticism of China, very, very minor. In my column that came out sa Sovereign PH, I mentioned nga na yung communique ng G7 mentions only China 4 times. When nung panahon ni Trump, 100 times yan a day. China, China, China. Hindi man lang talagang binanggit ang Xinjiang except once, Tibet, no mention at all. And so hindi na, the Europeans were trying to downplay conflict and tension, but of course China, just officially to inform our public, reported by the Russia Today, China scoffs at G7's international system and says the days when the world was controlled by a small group is over, are over. The days are over, And yun na nga, kanina nabanggit ko, and the image should be the previous one. Internet reportedly shut off as G7 leaders squabble with Biden over China. And then doon sa baba po, nilagay kong headline galing sa, CNN World. Biden pushes China threat at G7 and NATO, but European leaders tread carefully. So, importante yung ma-point out niya na yung Europeano ay nag-iingat na sa kanyang relation sa China.
Kasi po, dapat talagang mag-ingat ang Europeans when you talk about this geopolitical and China being the rising superpower economically, no? Kasi that will be a political and economic suicide for them. They would really lose a market, a huge market in China. At saka ang daming benefits kasi ang BRI mo rin, umiikot siya from Africa going to Europe, and even UK is even part of it na kasi may mga goods na ngayon na dinideliver through the railway system na mas mura po kaysa sa pag inan mo siya pag transport mo yung goods through the sea. No, even then mayroon ka maritime din na maritime Silk Road na part ng BRI.
That's
din.
where I want to go to my article that came out in Sovereign PH, yung G7, can we flash that again? G7 cursing but copying China, yung Belt and Road.
Oh.
Nabanggit mo na nga, yung Build Back Better World ni Biden, pagkokopya ng Belt and Road Initiative. Now, bakit nila kinokopya? Kasi very successful. Sabi ko nga dito, in one of my 2 articles that I wrote about this, the emulation is the best flattery. Ginagaya ang China. Of course, the question is, kaya ba nilang gawin?
Yun.
But I'm going back to what Ado mentioned, si Gude Moore, to highlight kung bakit napakaganda ito at dinagaya ng Amerika ngayon. Gustong gayahin. Kung magagaya ba, hindi natin masabi. Kasi paliwanag ng Liberian Public Works Minister, dati yung goods from Africa to Asia will take 9 months.
Yes.
8 to 9 months. Pero with the Belt and Road and the Maritime Silk Road, isang linggo lang.
Weeks.
Yung goods from China, telebisyon, anumang gusto ng mga market ng Africa, isang linggo lang nandyan na. At sa Africa, syempre yung kanilang exports, isang linggo nasa China na. O sa Asia na. And doon naman sa loob ng Africa, sabi niya, dati, buwan-buwan din to travel from one end of Africa to the other. Ngayon, 3 days dahil sa 8-lane or 6-lane highway, trains and so on. So yung mga produkto galing sa kung Africa yan, East Africa, pupunta sa West Africa in 2-3 days, ship to Asia in 8 days, 7 days, kompleto na. And back to Africa. Isipin mo dati 9 months.
Yes. And there's a lot of problems with the 9 months, kasi the cost is higher, mamaya may mga goods dyan na masisira. Ang dami-dami, pero ito mabilis, no? So it means yung yung revenue mo mas mataas.
Kaya
mas mababa yung cost, mataas ang revenue.
Sa makatuwid, napakaganda at matagumpay ang Belt and Road Initiative na itong nakaraang 10 taon sinisiraan ng Amerika, hindi masiraan kasi totoong mabuti.
Two things to add. Hindi lang sa Africa yan.
Oo.
At pangalawa, that did not happen in a vacuum, sabi nga ni Goody Moore. No? That span about 15 years in development.
Yes.
Dito ho sa atin, makikita nyo karamihan na ng truck. And now, yung mga kotse are now Chinese. Bakit po? Kasi hindi na totoo yung katulad ng Japan. Ang Japan kasi, 15 to 20 years behind ang technology mo kung susunod ka sa kanya. Ang China, real time. Hindi niya pinagkakait. So, ang nangyayari, 1 week lang, nandito na yung spare part. Hindi na kailangan ng Isuzu, ng Toyota, na mag-stock, na malaking supply ng spare parts para makakumpit lang. Because in 1 week, parang through the courier service, nandyan na yan. So, at pangalawa, sabi ko nga, it took about 15 years for this. In those 15 years, ilan na naging presidente ng Amerika? Ilan na naging presidente ng Pilipinas? Samantala,
sa Amerika,
stable.
nagkaroon ng tatlo, at least tatlo.
Sa atin, 2, 3.
So, yung mga policy, paano sila kung hindi nga susunod sila sa model na sinasabi ni Goody Moore? They have to change the model, no? And really follow. But when you follow and copy BRI, you change the model. Hindi pwedeng gaganyan ka lang.
At saka importante, ang kaibahan, yung public public-private partnership yung kay Biden. Umaasa siya sa,
private sector.
Okay.
Ang private sector, nangahanap yan tubo.
Oo, always.
Ang public naman, interest ng China is not only tumubo but also to diplomatic reasons.
Hindi, for the people. Kasi
Supply
public
and
yan
service.
Public good ang inaano niya. It's a public good, so
Delivery.
everyone benefits from it.
Yeah.
At saka 2013 pa ang BRI. How many countries na ang kasali dyan? 100? And then international
Over 100.
organization.
Over 100.
Oo. Saka nakita ko yan kasi pinanood ko yung documentary at saka binasa ko yung latest na report dyan. Ang dami, hindi lang pala yan project na infrastructure. Ang mga countries din, they get together, of course, with China and the rest of the countries, and they also share cultural exchanges. Like yung may mga dancing sila, they share so many things, no? Na para yung people-to-people relation is ma-solidify. Hindi lang siya state, may people-to-people din siya.
Ang latest data na nakalap ko, yung trade of the BRI countries
Alone.
has hit 1.7 trillion US dollars. So doon sa among the countries nga, 1.7 trillion dollars na ang kanilang commercial relations. And
Laki,
so that is why again, sa kabila ng puro batikos ng Amerika sa China, ginagaya na niya yung magagandang programa ng China. Ultimately, it leads to the question nga, sa mundo, hindi natin marinig kasi laging nakatingin tayo sa Western media eh. Pero dahan-dahan, ang katotohanan lumalabas na tama pala ang mga itinataguyod ng China, makakabuti sa mundo. And siyempre, si Presidente Duterte ay tama sa kanyang desisyon na lumapit sa China, lumayo, magdistansya sa Amerika at magbalanse ng mga ito.
Yes.
Kado?
At hindi lamang towards China, ang Europe nag-a-adjust na ng kanilang change ng models. In fact, dito sa supply lang oil and gas, they are now adopting a friendlier attitude towards Russia. Oo. Kasi nga, yun, yung model niya, more on what the national interest of the country is rather than the vested interest of the foreign power.
Oh, but the thing here is that the US is so insecure that that US wants even to destroy this relationship with China and Russia. But they will not be able to do that because the strategic partnership is getting stronger and stronger. Kasi ang partnership with Russia is not only on military but also on many aspects, economic, social, space. They also are cooperating on space exploration na. So, they cannot do that. It's really like Eurasia na ang kasi Asyano din naman ang mga Russians eh.
Well, Russia decided to be part of Asia.
Ayun.
Kasi dalawang dekada sila inisnab
Eurasia.
ng kanluran, ng Western powers, ng Europe. Parang second-class citizen ng Russia sa European community. Napikon na. And
Dito na
nagkaroon
kami
ng
sa Asia.
magandang kasunduan sa China, complementarity talaga, nagko-complement yung economic power ng China and the resource power ng Russia. So all's well that ends well for the world. At yung adikain ng China na community of shared future for mankind, yung nasa Christmas songs po ng kanluran, peace on earth, goodwill to men, di ba? Batang-bata pa ako, tonto ako doon kasi magandang message.
Maganda yung message.
Pero bakit puro gera sa Vietnam, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan ang
Hindi glad tidings.
pinanggagalingan ng Christmas Carol na yon na maganda? Puro gera naman nakikita ko. Now, it is Asia that can make it a reality.
Noon, medyo vague pa yung vision natin sa PhilBRICS, no? That's Brazil, Russia, India,
PhilBRICS
China
po
and South
is
Africa.
a think tank that we established, no? Philippines, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa partnership. Yun po inspired by the BRICS initiative ng China and Russia and India. So it's coming into fruition. Okay, we have only 30 seconds left to say goodbye and thank you.
Yes, maraming salamat po mga kabansa sa inyong pagsubaybay sa amin. Subaybayan po ninyo kami next Friday ulit. Magandang araw sa ating lahat at sana po ay nasa mabuti kayong kalagayan. Ingat pa rin po tayo, may COVID-19 pa po at follow the minimum health standards at pabakuna na po tayo. Thank you everyone and have a good day.
Kado.
Oh, ako pa. Maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat. We'll see you again on Friday sa isa pang balitaktakan discussion with Mentong and Kaana.
Okay, in the next 7 days, pansinin niyo ang mga balita sa Pilipinas at sa mundo. We will discuss that next week. Mabuhay and have a good week ahead of you.